Hello, friends. I have a few brief announcements. The Forbidden documentary, Occult Louisiana, will soon be available on Amazon Prime. It may take up to a few weeks to show up there, but in the meantime, if you would like to see the film, it's available for download on our website, forbiddenknowledge.news, or you can click that direct link in the description. We will soon be starting production on the second Forbidden documentary, Nature of Reality, Part 1 and 2. This is going to be a massive project, and we're going to require travel across the country, food, lodging, and equipment. We once again need your help. We are completely self-funded, and until the first film hits Amazon, we are still relying on our podcast revenue, donations, and what we make from our pre-release of Occult Louisiana. If you've enjoyed Forbidden Knowledge News and the Forbidden documentary, and you would like to help us produce an epic two-part film, there are a few ways you can do so. You can make a donation using the links in the description. You can purchase Occult Louisiana for only $5 from our website. You can also get a Rokfin premium membership at rokfin.com/FKN+. And you can always download our podcast episodes directly through Spreaker.com, and that is completely free for you. We are incredibly grateful for all the support over the years, and I can't wait to bring you many more years of extraordinary content. Enjoy this next episode. Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Sedore. First, a couple of announcements. The Forbidden documentary Occult Louisiana will be available on Amazon Prime within the next few weeks. But in the meantime, if you'd like to see the film, you can download it right now for $5 from our website. Just go to forbiddenknowledge.news or click that link right in the description. A great way to help support Forbidden Knowledge News is to download our episodes directly through Spreaker or our website, as well as by getting a Rokfin Premium membership. You go to rokfin.com/FKN+. With that membership, you get access to all of our premium content and all the premium content from every creator on Rokfin. You can get Forbidden Knowledge News 5 days a week on Rokfin, Rumble, and our website. Again, the website is forbiddenknowledge.news, which is also the home of the Forbidden Knowledge Network, where we feature some amazing podcasts. Today, I want to welcome back to the show Sedore. He is an author, speaker, singer, and songwriter who was raised within a high-level Illuminati bloodline. He now speaks out about his experiences and gives insights into these dark realms. Shane, welcome back. How you doing?
All is well, brother. How are you?
I can't complain. I'm doing pretty damn good. Looking forward to today. We're going to be gorging ourselves on yet another conspiracy buffet. That's right, a delicious spread of conspiratorial delicacies fit for all our listeners hungry for information. We're going to cover some old, some new, and we may even create some new conspiracies today. Who knows? Anything is possible at Conspiracy Buffet. But before we dig in, remind the audience a little bit about yourself, Shane.
I'm just a guy who speaks on the internet. There's not really much to know. I'm kidding. Well, maybe I'm not. I wrote a blog called The Ruiner Blog a long time ago now. It's been 9, almost 10. I became internet famous because of that, and everybody knows me as an Illuminati whistleblower. As much as I say that word is nonsense, that's the title I have to play under. And so here we are.
Well, I think that might be a good place to start. First of all, do you still have any contact with your previous quote unquote family?
Individuals that, were involved in, not family, just people who were also involved in the same projects and cults that I was involved in. We bump into each other. We stay in contact to some extent.
And is there any active involvement or anything possibly that may be covertly going on that you're still involved with?
Not at all. No,
Right on.
I've been. I think I've had like kind of one involvement with them where I was kind of technically working since the time I was 26, which would have been a long time ago now. So I stay in contact simply because these are people, right? And I do have relationships with certain people that are involved with it. But in terms of what they do in that organization, I have not wanted anything to do with all of that for a very, very long time.
Right on. Well, let's dispel some of the myths and maybe even find out if any of it has inkling of truth to it when it comes to these realms of Illuminati, royal families, bloodlines, black projects, all these realms. Let's start with the possibility that high-level individuals are being cloned at for multiple reasons, for appearances, maybe that they've died and they want to replace this individual. But cloning, what do you think, and how far has this been developed, and is it still going on?
Well, I mean, cloning is a reality. Basically, what they can do is they can basically do a genetic replication. That's not a person. There's nothing really in there. It's really just an empty space. It's an empty vessel. What can be done is, I don't always know the audience, but more or less you can move your soul out of your body, out into the ether, out into a lot of various realms to do various exploring. And you can do that and land it into another body if you have the skill and know-how. And so that's what the cloning program was kind of for. Was a lot of it was about making disposable bodies, like things that they could hurt without actually having a soul involved, right? And then also being able to get inside of those bodies and do things without having to worry about damaging their physical body. So there's a great reality to that. And like what happens in the conspiracy world all the time is that we take these realities and then we put them into the wrong package and we start talking about them in times when they're not true, and it kind of gets to be a problem. So the reality of cloning being what it is, if you were going to have a celebrity swapped out, there would be no discernible change to the public because it would be the same soul moved into a new version of that body, right? Wow. Whereas a lot of the time where we use it, we're talking about, the obvious target being a man with dementia who runs your country, and people thinking that somehow that's a clone when, I don't know, if that were a clone, then it would be behaving a lot better than a man with dementia, right? So it's funny because it's usually the things that aren't real that the community jumps on, and that's one of the great examples of it, right? But another level of that doesn't get discussed as much, but is technically still cloning, I call test tube babies, which is why we have so many celebrities that look remarkably similar, right? Because we are physical, but we're also energetic beings, and there's this phenomenon that happens where the soul in the body, the environment shapes the genetics, right? Like it's not like you can just take this genetics and put it here and grow. Like if you took two clones, you grew them in two different parts of the planet, they would end up looking differently, right? It's the same thing with identical twins. My older sisters are identical twins, which are technically a clone, right? Like in the same, but just done naturally. But even they, like, there are differences between them, right? They're not exactly perfectly identical to each other. And the same thing would be termed. So if you raise clones from children, they would look similar, but not identical. And if you kind of look through Hollywood, you're going to notice this with some girls and some boys, but it's a lot with females where this is true. And so that goes into the earlier version of cloning, where people in power, if you will, people up the chain of what the public likes to refer to as the Illuminati, had the option of having these test tube babies, which were reoccurrences of genetics taken from previous generations of celebrities, sometimes even dead pharaohs, sometimes other figures in history that they happen to have genetic copies of. So that's probably a lot more prevalent than actual clones running around out there is that. Because yeah, that's the problem. Is a great movie to kind of understand would be the movie Replicas with Keanu Reeves. Even though it's kind of a terrible movie, they do a good job of explaining how it actually does work. And in that movie, he shows that he, spoiler alert, regrows this person, but it's not them, right? He actually needs some type of copy of her memory to put into this clone in order to facilitate. So it becomes another level of cloning, where they do have the technology to basically just take a copy of your consciousness, right? There's what we call, these are virtual intelligences. So it's basically like a copy of you. It's not you, but it's a copy, like a replica of you that can then be stored and transferred to this. So almost like a virtual version of you could be created in that way. And the problem is that they're loaded with all of this previous experience, but new experiences shape their behavior as well. So, if we were to take you and a cloned version of you and just let you both live life for 2 years, after those, indiscernible amount of time, you would be two different people again, right? You wouldn't really be copies of each other anymore because of how these things shape. So, there's a lot of different levels to it. And the unfortunate problem is, a lot of the reason why we don't hear any sort of disclosure on it, we haven't even got the FDA to open their files in any sort of way, is because, unfortunately, we jump onto things like the Biden conspiracy, and we blow those really big. And unfortunately for the public, that's not a viable example of cloning.
You said that these clones are basically empty husks until they have a form of consciousness that's put into them. Is it possible that we're dealing also with non-human intelligences and consciousness that can be placed into these clones?
So that would be the alternative too, is like the mechanism by which this technology is happening is something spiritual. It's like body swapping, right? Like it's something you and I could do if we were in the same room, make the mutual agreements to, like, I'm going to jump in Chris's car, you can jump in Shane's car, and we'll drive them around for a while, see what happens, right? But taking that further into technology, that's where that goes. And sorry, I kind of lost your question for a second.
Well, non-human entities being put into
so
clones.
Yes, disembodied spirits. So basically souls, or what people might call a ball of consciousness that has left a body. We have a dimension. It's traditionally called Sheol. It's like kind of the land of the dead. It's where people see ghosts, right? It's the afterlife dimension you see in movies and stuff like that. It's like a staging area between here and actually like leaving to go get reincarnated. But anyways, that dimension is kind of like a layer on top of this one. And that's where, ghosts would be. And a lot of those ghosts do have what we would call ghosts, a disembodied entity of that, various names to them, obviously ghosts being one, do have the ability to take over a living body. And there's various ways that happens. We call the most obvious one being possession. But in that case, it's actually a body with two different consciousnesses in it. And it just happens to be the alien consciousness, the invader consciousness, that's driving it. While the other person's kind of in a sunken place. observing, kind of like they're in the backseat of the car, they can't drive the car. And then the other one would be where the driver wants out, right? So let's just say, this could be suicidal, it could be due to some type of major trauma, could be caused for a variety of reasons, but even yogis, ascended humans have figured this out. Like, we can choose our time of death if we want. We can actually just leave the body and let it drop and die, right? We do have that ability. And sometimes subconsciously people make that decision, which is like a suicidal type of mind, or someone like a soul that just really wants to let go. And so these disembodied spirits will often look for bodies that are individuals like that. And it's not really like a brokered deal per se, but like they'll find that moment where that soul is like, detaching, leaving, and they'll jump in, thereby occupying and animating the body, still keeping it alive in the process. Otherwise, that body would just die once the soul left it. But they can take it over, and we traditionally will call those like hitchhikers, sometimes walk-ins, words like that, but it's still the same mechanism, right? And then, the next level of that would be a form of consciousness that is what we would call alien to this planet. So a soul that has in some way projected itself into this realm. Excuse me, we might call that like an ET soul as an example, who could then do the same thing, just take over the body, become the driver of the car, and live out that life, or occupy that clone if that's the case, right? So
That's insane. You mentioned walk-ins. I've had a couple of guests that theorized something interesting about what's happening with the men in black. I had Trey Hudson on a while back. I don't know if you've ever heard his encounter with a woman in black. She shows up to the area that they're doing research in the meadow, and she drives up in an SUV. She's very nicely dressed in this like pantsuit, starts asking all kinds of questions about what they're doing. She says she knows him from either college or high school or something like that, and started giving him all kind of information about himself. Then she says she wanted to go show him the monkey bears near her property, and then she fell apart, completely stopped making sense, kind of short-circuited. She even backed up, pulled off her pants, and peed on the floor in the middle of everything, and she couldn't really form sentences after that, so she just got in her SUV and took off as fast as she could. Well, Trey's like, I got to find out what happened here. What's going on? Well, he believes that what could be happening with some of these men in black situations is it is a walk-in situation. It's a human that, for whatever reason, this intelligence has taken it over to do the men in black job, or gather information, or prevent people from doing certain things, and that once the job is done, this entity will leave and the person will be back in control of themselves. He managed to get in touch with her a few years later, and she did not recall any of the interaction between them. All she remembers was she was driving, she lost time, and then a few minutes later she was driving another direction. What do you think is happening there?
MK Ultra. That's exactly where that leads to, right? Is they can create alternates that they can then trigger, and then that person goes and does something, and for you, it's just missing time, right? Just like people who have, I was going to say multiple personality disorder, but we're not allowed to call that anymore. DID. For non-MK Ultra reasons, it's the same experience they have, where the Ultra takes over, the Ultra drives the car. They don't really have a recognition of it. They don't really remember it. It's and so with MK Ultra, they've basically just figured out that mechanism, and they can force that on people. So they'll have like a trigger. It's usually a series of words, not a single word, because that would be very dangerous, but it's kind of like a phrase that they could say to someone. This is an example. And then it would trigger the altar. The altar would come forward, the persona, right? Like, so if it were you, Chris would go into the background, into that sunken space, and, Phil would take over, right? And Phil is trained to be a man in black, be a whatever, right? And then Phil goes and does those things. And then what it sounds like, because that the programming it likes to break down, right? We're dealing with honeycombs in the brain, right? And the membranes are
Yeah.
very thin; they overlap. The front persona always has the most power, so we have a tendency to break down, and in which case you would actually have a physical breakdown along with it. Because if you think about it, it's like two different consciousnesses fighting within you over who gets to control the body. And the other part of it being that it's almost impossible to only create one alter. You're pretty much always going to fracture that person into multiple, right? The standard operating number is somewhere around 24. So yeah, and you can see if anyone wants to kind of like watch this in a movie or something, or there's a documentary actually about one of the first MPD DID serial killers. I think it's Inside the Mind of Madness. It was on Netflix for a while. The movie Split, which is part of the series with Unbreakable and Glass. He's showing you multiple personality, and that's actually a good example of what it would look like if it were triggered by MK Ultra, because there are differences, right? Like anyone can develop multiple personality because it's just enough applied trauma. So you could just be a regular person who, you know, parents are very, very abusive, or maybe live with the grandparents who are very, very abusive. You could develop DID through that without the use of MK Ultra. But with MK Ultra, they've perfected it. So they can actually, like, you know, basically name your alters, create them on purpose, train them as they see fit. So they basically would hypnotize you so that you fell away. Phil came forward. They would teach Phil how to interview people, Phil how to interrogate people, Phil how to use guns, maybe even, right? And all the while Chris thinks he's sleeping or isn't there.
Yeah.
And then Phil gets put back to sleep, and Chris comes forward, goes on about his life as if that he doesn't even know that that's happening. And then they trigger Phil, and, you know, Chris gets in his car and drives somewhere and does some crazy shit that he has no idea what he's doing, because it's actually Phil driving Chris's body to do it. And so, yeah, and then obviously that gets played with in conspiracy world as well, because of that reality and their ability to do that, where people think that maybe they're being, you know, shipped to other planets or things like that. But it's important to remember that your physical body is still involved, otherwise the whole mechanism doesn't work. And yeah.
How prevalent do you think the MyLab phenomena is when it pertains to the general public? Do you think that more people are being taken than they probably realize for different agendas or narratives, perpetuate abduction narratives, things like that, MK Ultra? How prevalent is this in these modern times?
Nowadays, not nearly as much as it was through the 90s and 80s and 70s before it, more or less because they got really freaking good at it, and they have technology that can kind of replace actually taking us places and doing things to us, right? So they can influence your mind in your dream remotely. They don't need to actually take you to a facility and strap you into something, as an example, is the difference at this point. So you know, being able to the MyLab experiments as what they were, as a way to basically replace angels and demons with aliens, and the mind control of the public in that sense of it, you know, that was perpetuated physically because it had to be perpetuated physically at the time. But at this point in time, they can kind of just reach into your dreams and make you think, or make you believe, convince your mind that you are being abducted, or whatever the scenario is.
Damn. All right. Donald Marshall, how true and how much of his story do you think is accurate, and how much is just false memories or trauma or him making shit up?
Clearly it all revolves around him. So if we were to just separate that from it,
Yeah.
you know, I have a lot of compassion for the man, so I try to be polite about this. But you know, what he's talking about is true. The fact that they do create clones of people so that they can use them for entertainment purposes. Right. So if you were rich enough, you could get your very own Cindy Crawford clone, as an example. And it wouldn't obviously be Cindy Crawford in it, but it would be a Cindy Crawford clone, probably driven by some type of Memorex, or we used to call them artificial souls, but that was never the name for them. I never knew the actual name for them, but it was basically like what they show you in Replica, where they can record your consciousness as it is, like record a copy of you right now. That data is what we used to call an artificial soul, because that's basically what it represents, is like, a copy of your soul. It's not a soul, it's really just data in a computer, right? And it's really just information. It's not consciousness truly. So it becomes a blueprint for the person. And so you could put that into the Cindy Crawford, and they would kind of come to the awakening thinking that they are her, but then you could actually inform her that they're not her, right? That they're just a clone of her. And then they would behave as like maybe Katie Crawford for you in private, right? So there would be that kind of application. But the one that he's speaking to more is kind of, in more of a mass ceremony, mass entertainment type spectrum. If you imagine, like, just like we would gather at a stadium to watch a football game or a basketball game or something like that, they can gather together in their own little stadiums to watch, old school gladiator matches or UFC with no rules and then machine guns, and have a real celebrity death match where they have, whatever celebrity they want, and also, anything your imagination can go with in the darkness there, which Donald talks about. That operation is true, and that's actually the most popular usage of it. Like, if you were to kind of narrow down the usage of cloning, that's probably 80% of it is them using it for entertainment purposes like that, because it's not perfect, right? You wouldn't want to, although it sounds great to like have a cloned body, it's really uncomfortable, right? It doesn't feel, it's not yours, and it, right? And so there's almost like this constant rejection going on. So you wouldn't want to be in one. No one ever wants to be in one for very extended periods of time. And they still do break down more rapidly than ours do, probably because it's an abomination of nature. But I'm not a scientist, so I can't explain it properly. But they do still do that. So it's not a long-term fix. And so that's why, using them for that, using them for something like soldiers, right? Like if you needed to have a standing army of physical bodies that could be driven remotely from a bunch of kids who think that they're playing Call of Duty at home, you would be able to pull that off, and things of that nature.
Do you think that those operations, these arenas with clones, are still occurring in some ways?
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's not something you would give up in a hurry.
Yeah, it seems like it. Seems too entertaining for them.
Well, yeah. I mean, even just
That's crazy.
for you, like if I were to give you a clone of yourself and say, go rock climbing, you're probably going to have a lot more fun than doing it in that body,
Yeah. Now, you mentioned serial killers earlier. How prevalent do you think that the creation of serial killers through these black projects for different various purposes is? Do you think that most that we know of have been influenced in some way?
I don't know if most would be fair. Many.
Okay.
The mechanism by which a serial killer is created is very much, what MK Ultra is replicating, right? So they learned it first. Again, fiction, but that Mindhunters show, I think it was a David Fincher show that they did, was all about them studying serial killers so they could design the profile, right? So imagine once you have that profile, you'd have a blueprint to create one. Right. And I think that in retrospect, it would have been, or reverse engineering that, they would have been creating them, sending them into the public, seeing what happens, and then studying the results so that, moving forward, they can eventually turn it into, like they're doing with everything else, technology that could, kind of just turn the public against themselves or against each other. And unfortunately, I think we see a lot of that these days.
Let's move on to our next delicacy here, Antarctica. The conspiracies surrounding Antarctica have been some of the most fun that I've ever heard. Again, seemingly never have any real evidence for any of this, but it is super entertaining to talk about. Let's start with the stories of Admiral Byrd and his excursions. Were those accurate, do you think?
Embellished. I mean, we have to remember that they kind of happened in spurts, right? Like he was interviewed at different times, and we've put it all together, when we look at it now. And if you actually do follow it chronologically, you can see that his story did the same snowball burrito effect, as our friend Ryder would call it. That happens a lot of the time. But if you go back to the beginning, what he was talking about was basically just that there's remnants of an older civilization there that they don't want the public to see, that there's buildings there that they don't want us to know exists, that there's pyramids there, that there's things alive there, like animals that we don't have on other land masses that are supposed to be mythological, like things of that nature. And so the control of that is kind of where it all started, and where a lot of it feeds out of, right, is the control of the historical elements from it. And then you add on to that it's a great place to go test things, especially because they've decided that it's this neutral territory that nobody's going to live, right? So company like, recent whistleblowers have talked about Raytheon's facility there, and companies like that can go down there and do whatever the fuck they want to do without prying eyes, right? So there's that. When we start to get into, Nazis occupying it with spaceships, and ancient civilizations with spaceships and stuff like that, that's when we're, again, taking some truth and going a little too far with it. I would love to be proven wrong. This is, again, I'm being asked the question, I'm giving my honest answer. But the use of it to test things outside the public eye, to build things outside the public eye, and then the root of it all is basically just that. If we were to get to go walk around down there, every government all over the planet has a lot of explaining to do. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Now, what about the speculation that there is extra land beyond the poles and beyond the ice wall, or things of that nature? What do you think of that?
It comes from, there is extra land, like things that we don't get to see with the very heavily curated satellite images we get available to us, and things that we wouldn't just stumble across. Antarctica being a great example of how, even though it still looks massive on the map, it's actually a lot bigger than that, right? And that's true for other places too. So that's where it's come from. I don't know if anyone caught the memo, but the most famous shared ice wall picture that is supposed to, it's one of the, it was actually, I'm pretty sure it was in Eric's book, but one of the proofs of flat earth anyways. Someone went back last year and took a picture, and it's all melted. So it was never a wall. It's actually just a coastline, but it's the exact same place taken to, that picture was like 30, 40 years old that everyone references. So taken today, you can see it's like a couple mountains. You can still see where the peaks were and where it used to be buried in snow, and it's just not anymore. So proof in the result that there was no ice wall there to begin with. But anyways, again, maybe I'm wrong. Prove it. Anyway,
no, right on. It's fun to discuss either way.
Yeah.
This is another one that's become super popular lately, and haven't really dug too deep into the topic of Tartaria and our lost hidden history, and the possibility that even as soon as a couple of 100 years ago, we may have had a complete reset or mud flood. What are your insights into what's happening with this?
The story of the foundation of the United States requires that there was nobody there when they got there, right? And we found out years later that was never true, that there was a lot of natives here, right? And then we also got sold the story that they were like kind of primitive. Had that reinforced with Westerns and spaghetti Westerns and all those movies and stuff like that, all the tales from back then. But, very much like what they're hiding in Antarctica, North America was covered in buildings that weren't supposed to be here, right? And a lot of what we know as the Lewis and Clark expeditions ended up being scouting to try and find these places so they could go out and level them before they moved people there. And so that's why we still have a lot of their foundations, and a lot of the buildings they didn't even bother breaking down, they just repurposed. And so that is a bunch of it. Again, that's, conspiracy snowball burrito, Tartaria is a great example, because once again, we're dealing with something that is very true, but when they try to put it into Tartaria as this global empire who did this thing, that's where the whole argument starts to break down, discrediting all the truth that's in it. But, the fact that North America was occupied a really long time ago, and humans have had more advanced technology than we believe that they've had over time, right? And we have had, the flood was a reality, and it didn't happen a couple hundred years ago, but a few thousand years ago, probably around 13 to 11,000 years ago, that happened. And we have to remember, anyone who lives in a northern climate, you have to every once in a while kind of dig up your foundation, because houses sink, right? Especially when you have the earth fluctuating through being cold and warm, right? And as it starts to fall. And so if you leave something alone like that for 400 years, it's going to appear to be very, very buried in dirt by the time you come along to it. And, if you don't have the technology like we do today to be able to dig that up, you might choose to just move into it as is and use that as an extended basement, which is what has happened in a lot of cases, right? But yeah, so a combination of both the destruction of the flood, which then buried a lot of things through, the mud flood theory, right? The basis of the mud flood theory, that water creates mud, which creates erosion, which moves soil around, which would bury things. We see this in Egypt too, with blowing sand and burying pyramids there, right? We see it with water levels rising and swallowing cities. So that's what it all comes down to. And then one thing I will add to that is, before Tartaria really blew up, I was living in a house with 3 other guys, and one of them was a bit of a drug addict and worked on the dark web making memes. And he had been hired by a Russian Orthodox church to make Tartaria memes. And this is before even I had heard anyone throwing around the word Tartaria. And he was telling me all about it, how they really wanted to push this idea that North America was stolen from this empire that was the Tartary, right? Which would have tied into that part of the world, right? And just in time, because at the same time, if you think, there is a war going on over there, right? So it all kind of lines up time-wise of a lot of the propaganda that's been going on. So again, one of the things that when I was a disinformation agent, I participated and experienced was them watching you, learning what you want to believe, and then learning how to sell that to you. And they were doing that in the very, very early days of the internet, and even before the internet was in every home, right? So at this point, as soon as we hit something, right, they're going to throw out the most crazy version of it that we're all going to latch onto and start repeating and parroting. And it's going to turn out to be bullshit. And it's just like what QAnon did to the Truther movement. It starts to slowly criminalize what we do by asking questions. And so we do have to be careful of things like that. And I'm not pointing any fingers or assessing any blame. I'm just saying that, this is something that they do. So when you do see these things spiraling out of control like that, please take pause and question that. The truth movement has been experiencing this since the film Zeitgeist. So,
yeah. Now, you mentioned that the civilization was possibly more advanced technologically, but most likely in a different way that we understand technology now. What do you think that we were capable of when it comes to our technology then?
We're slowly getting back to it. We're just going to end up using graphene to do it instead of using nature to do it. But it's basically, the old Tesla technology, all of what we would sometimes people call it free energy, etheric energy, being able to harness the natural energies of the planet, being able to kind of create a communication web on that frequency, like on that energetic frequency. All of those different things is kind of what we used to do. So we were basically just using the energetic framework of the planet to power the tech, like even light bulbs. Like, if we had computers and batteries, like we didn't have to plug them into a wall and use electricity as we did it today. They had ways of just harnessing that, such as the pyramids were an example of spires and all the obelisks and the Tartarian style buildings that we keep pointing out with those beautiful like that was all meant to be able to harness this energy. Same way we do, right? It's like a frequency where they're generating it out while also bringing it in, creating this current, creating basically an energy field around entire buildings. And all of our technology was based on that style of energy. So it just operated differently, right? So we were more advanced probably before that, but we're getting back to the same place. We're just taking a different means. Yeah.
Do you think that we had capability of flight through different machines and developments?
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's like I call it the difference between technology and magic for a lot of it, right? Like we didn't need things like the internet so much because we could all get into the morphogenic field and kind of communicate telepathically more in that way. Imagine a news bulletin that just went into the ether and everybody kind of got the memo simultaneously, right? As opposed to you actually having to open an app and look at it. That's kind of an example of the difference. So, and obviously the whole occult has been about hiding those abilities and replacing them with technology.
Right on. Well, while we're on altered history and altered right now, altered reality, real time, the Mandela effect. We may have discussed this briefly before, but I want to refresh your insights into this. Is this a form of collective misremembering? Are we seeing just an alteration of things online to the point where they can pretty much change anything that is internet-based? Or is it something else, shifting timelines, something along those lines? What do you think?
Well, I mean, until someone can give me an example of a person, place, or thing that has actually definitely changed, then I think it's suspicious just right from the get-go. Like, we're talking about swapping out letters, which our brain does naturally, right? I'm sure we've all bumped into those memes where it's just scrambled words, but you can read it, right? Like I sometimes share that and say, this is why the Mandela effect seems real to people. Because a lot of the time that's what it is. Speed reading is all based on being able to throw away and replace words like and the, in and the, like these kind of middle words that aren't really that informative. Our brains are actually more wired to communicate in images than they are in words anyways, right? So our memory for letters and words, it swaps it out. So that's part of it. And then the other part of it is like people forget about copyright laws sometimes. So, one of the easiest one is like the Berenstain and Berenstein, which is literally just China selling whichever one wasn't real, I forget at this point, the Stein, I believe, because they don't have to pay for the copyright. So you could go to a dollar store and buy Berenstein Bear books, and you would never notice the difference other than A and E, right? And the swapping of letters. It was the same thing with DVDs. You could go to, like, I'm sure anyone who lives in a city has walked by through Chinatown of their city and seen like a bunch of burnt DVDs out there for sale. Well, they can't put them in real packaging, so they often have to Photoshop the images, and then they put those out. And that's been going on for a very, very long time too. My mom used to work in a video store when I was a little kid, and they used to have to sort those out every once in a while, where it would be like two movies, but one of the titles would be just slightly off, and then the artwork on the box is also just slightly off because it's counterfeit, right? They've basically they're trying to avoid paying for the licensing. And so that's a big part of it. You can go in and buy Superman toys today at a dollar store, right? And I remembered it being Superman, but it was Superman, right? So that's a big part of it. And then with the people thing, I can actually predict when they're going to come up now when a celebrity dies. A recent one with Henry Kissinger, because I follow politics, so he's constantly being discussed. So, knowing that man was still alive and just turned 100 6 months ago is pretty clear and present in my mind. But for the average person, not at all, right? So a lot of people, when he died last week, were going, I thought he died 6 months ago. I thought he died 6 months ago. I thought he turned 100 6 months ago. And they did the same thing with Bob Barker. I thought he died in this year. He retired from The Price is Right that year. Okay?
Oh, wow.
Or people have accidents, end up in the hospital, and we see that news. And then we get told that they're on life support, or we get told that we don't think they're going to pull through, but then we don't find out that they did. Like, I actually had that recently with a friend who I saw, and I was convinced that that person died a few years ago because I heard that they pulled through the operation that they had, right? I didn't hear that they got better. I just heard that they were fucked up and in the hospital, sorry for my language, and my mind filled in the rest. And so with most of them, and that's why, like, you know, there aren't any valid examples that makes me even consider it, despite the fact that I know the type of technology that they have out there. I still don't see any of the examples that anyone's ever presented as being valid. And then the thing that we're doing now, like I just bumped into this with Shazam. This is the idea that Sinbad was in a movie called Shazam. First of all, Shazam is a comic book character. So if that had have occurred, they needed the licensing for that movie, right? Yeah. And it would have been about the comic book character, not about a fucking genie, right? So what they did make was a movie called Kazam about a genie, starring, and this is where people's racism kicks in. I think it was, I actually saw a black guy on a video say, how come no black people think that this movie happened? Oh, because we ain't racist, right? He said, but yeah, and then there was that, but so it's going around, it's going around, and people are sharing either a meme or this TikTok video. In the meme, you've got an image across the front, across the top, which is photoshopped. Right, the movie case is not real. They've used an image of Jonathan Taylor Thomas from the season 3 box set for Home Improvement, and they've used an image from Sinbad from a photo shoot that he did, and they added the genie uniform, and it's quite clearly Photoshop, but that's proof that the movie does exist to some people, right? And then the other one was this guy who was, and it's so weird because he's got a safe, and the safe only has one movie in it, and it's that movie. And he pulls it out, right? And so he shows the front, but then he makes the mistake of flipping it over, because on the back, you see this little square of a picture. And that picture is a still frame from an April Fool's joke video that Sinbad made with college humor, making fun of people telling him that he was in a movie called Shazam, right? And this is something I point out to people, is it's all fun and games when you're swapping out titles, but when you start messing with people's lives, like how do you think Bob Barker's family felt when they went online and read like 2 million people making TikTok videos saying, oh, he died 3 years ago? You know what I mean? Yeah. Well, then who's been my dad for the last 3 years, you jackass? You know what I mean? Like, this is, I don't know. Anyways, yeah, that's
well, one that really got me scratching my head, and I still am not sure about this one, is the Bible verse that was originally the lion and the lamb, and now it's the wolf and the lamb. And I've seen pictures of this depiction. I could have sworn that I went to a Catholic school. I grew up in Catholic school. I could have sworn we read that very verse hundreds of times, and it just seems very odd to me. It doesn't really make sense that it would be the wolf and the lamb, but I could just be wrong. I don't know.
I mean, I have a song where I play with that all the time, like to save the lamb, I fed the wolf. And I have another one that's actually called The Wolf, and it comes from that Bible verse. So, you know, to me, it's always been that as well. And maybe that just means I'm on a different timeline than you. I don't, you know what I mean? Like, and that's kind of how absurd. There's a video game that just came out made by the people who make like Skyrim and Elder Scrolls Bethesda, and it's called Starfield, and it's all based on like the multiverse theory. At the end of each time, you can, spoiler alert, you can jump into a new universe, and they make fun of it during it because like they actually move locations around, right? Like, you know, if it were Earth, then the pyramids are no longer in Giza, now they're in Chicago, right? And like examples like that. And then you hear dialogue every once in a while being like, was that movie called this or that? I can't remember. Right? Because how often do we do that? One of my favorite things to do with people is like, without having listened to the song, write down all the lyrics to your favorite song and then listen to it. If you've made a simple mistake, even a letter off, then the Mandela effect's probably not real. You know, because that is your favorite song. And if your memory is so good and that perfect, it's just not. And I have what's called an eidetic memory, and people who have photographic memories, we all kind of just think that this idea is hilarious because memory is very, very fallible. It's incredibly suggestive. And it rewrites every time you think of something. And so,
well, with the amount of weed I smoked in my life, I will never trust my memory completely. So There's that.
And then the excuse that I was getting about the Sinbad thing was like, but we know the movie existed, so it doesn't matter that it's photoshopped. It's like, but it does, because that's how corroborated memories happen. Confabulated memories happen. Is someone's going to scroll across that, barely even look at it, and then sometime in the future, someone's going to be like, hey, do you remember a movie called Shazam with Sinbad in it? And they're going to say yes. Even though they actually don't, right? And I worked security for years. I've interviewed thousands of people in my life, about physical things that happened. Most of the time I have security cameras all over them, and I still have to interview them. Very rarely are they ever accurate. I was going to say honest, but that's not true. Accurate.
Right on. Well, you mentioned timelines. I've had guests that swear up and down that they have the ability to shift to different timelines or different realities that are occurring at the same time. One of my guests, you might be familiar with Dr. Bruce Goldberg. He claims that he went into a meditative state and he shifted himself into a different reality where there was different family members and he knew different people and things around him had changed. What do you think about that possibility?
Well, I've had similar experiences, and I think that the truth of the multiverse is that we are constantly creating our own all the time. That you're somewhere within yourself, you've created this multiverse of all of your different possibilities, and you're making choices based on like kind of collapsing all of those waves. But I've also had a non-drug induced experience with this thing that I do. I call them suicide baths. It's kind of like combining Wim Hof breathing with a sweat lodge. But I had this instance. I've told this story before. If you've heard me tell it before, I apologize. But anyways, a Tool song was playing, and Tool songs can be pretty long, but it's probably not longer than say 11 minutes. But during that Tool song, I went away and I was living out another life, and it was just, there was no real noticeable swap. It was just, hey, I'm now this person, and I've got, like, I had a wife, I had kids, I had a job, and it wasn't anything special. It was just me going to work and doing my work and coming home and hanging out with the wife and kids and, rinse and repeat. Very mundane experience, but it felt like about 6 weeks had gone by.
Whoa.
Like well over a month had gone by of me just, day after day living out this life. And then it ended, and the same Tool song was playing. Kind of like, I didn't actually go anywhere. And I started laughing hysterically, and my roommates had to come check on me to make sure I was okay. But like, I was just like, whoa, what was that? So I think that we just have that capability to tune into that. I think that we can tune into each other that way. I think that everything's all connected and time is kind of circular. So we can kind of, theoretically, experientially time travel, experience other people's existences, get into what we call the Akashic records, is basically just a recording of everything that's ever happened. And we all have access to that, right? And that can come back in just like, memories and symbology and things like that, dreams, or you can train yourself to really tap into that. So, I could make the same statement that I have the ability to like switch between all these different timelines, but I also understand that they're all tied into this one. Right. And it's almost like there's all these other possibilities, these roads that are all playing out, but my choices coalesce them all down into a single point, and that becomes reality. So I can use all of those as information gathering, if you will. Right. You just like, I've run the simulation of what happened if I told you I didn't fucking want to talk to you again today instead of actually doing this call, right? Just to see what that future would look like. But I didn't like it. I kind of felt like an asshole, so I didn't do that, right? As an example.
Right on.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the next course, which is the possibility of underground civilizations, subterranean humanoids that live in what some consider a hollow earth or pockets of earth. What do you think about that?
Living underground is something we've been doing for thousands of years, and even the modern version of man has figured out how to do it in ways they don't disclose to the public all the time. And there are cities underground, there are civilizations underground, there are let's say, facilities underground. All of those different things are true. Again, we've done the regular conspiracy thing where everything falls under the category of dumbs, and there's all these crazy things happening in them. But yeah, the burying effect that happens whenever the planet goes through a cataclysm, usually what happens is a part of the civilization will go underground before that happens, learn how to create life that way, and occasionally just stay down there, right? And our history on this planet has had several occurrences of that, a couple of which still exist to today. Yeah, I think the most frequent or the most prevalent of all of the underground truth is that there's cities underneath the earth that are old, right? Like very, very, very old. There's buildings of all sorts down there that have been kind of being used by current generations of humans for doing things that they don't want everybody else who lives on the surface to know that they do. So.
Right on. And would you say that there are what some would consider reptilian humanoids that live underground?
Yes.
And again, these are physical beings, right?
We have a version of reptilian humanoid that kind of evolved here, and has been living here for hundreds of thousands of years. They just don't have anything to do with us, our culture, their culture. We're not copacetic in any sort of way, and they have no desire to come up and eat us or anything like that either. So it's just, and this is separated from, the Draco reptilians, which are probably more commonly spoke about as like the controllers of the earth and stuff like that, right? But that particular version of reptilian is just a naturally occurring species here. And again, the earth is much bigger than people think it is, and the surface of the earth, if you will, runs much deeper than people think it is, and we're more occupied than people think we are.
Right on. The last few minutes we have, I want to get your insights into what appears to be this forced apocalyptic timeline that we're on. Everything since 2020 seems to be escalating in ways that follow this prophetic playbook. Pandemics, wars, rumors of war. Now we have the Israel-Palestine situation, which is going to escalate seemingly. Is this something that is attempted to be ushered in based on prophecy?
Yes, that's the point of its creation, was to try and create it as a reality. Imagination, will, and conviction, that's the basis of magic. The imagination for the apocalypse came from, a controlling group a long time ago. They wrote it out as a story, and it found its way into all the myths and all the religions, and all of the subcultures as well that have popped up since. And because people believe it in their own flavor, it's becoming real, right? The conviction in it, we've become convinced, and because we are convinced, it's manifesting. And that's how it has worked, and that was why they did it, and that's why we are where we're at right now. And that's also why it was all very well predicted. Like, I'm sure most of your viewers by now have probably seen the Albert Pike writings from years and years ago, talking. It's been my entire lifetime. They've known that this was going to happen because they were going to make it happen. And here we are now. It's what I say a lot these days. It's just like, it's a weird place for me, because it was like all of the things that were coming are here now, right? And it's any questions or any doubts I might have had are all obliterated because it's here now, and proof in the results is kind of the inevitable right now.
What do you see happening with the unfolding of the alien agenda and what we've been presented with the bodies that came out of Mexico? Are these just paper mache fabrications, or is there something real about these?
Oh, paper, in that case, yeah, paper mache recreations.
Right on.
they would have things like that. Like they would have, most of them would be older than we would think of, but they definitely have stuff like that, which is kind of what they would be hinting at. But it's really just kind of being used as a tool, because it's not like we have this communication and they're going to do a mass landing or anything like that. We're just aware of the fact that they exist, right, for the most part. And so it's being used right now for political means, obviously. Like it's the next time you see a UFO report, type Hunter Biden into your search engine and you'll see what yeah. So it's being used for that. It's also going to be, disclosure, which everyone was talking about for years until it didn't happen. The path of discoveries as it is, they're going to start to slowly release all of this new technology, because in some subconscious way, we're acknowledging that that's where our technology is coming from. Right. So it's almost like they have a scapegoat to just start releasing things without really having to explain how they got there. And it's, having the story of it's all reverse engineered alien stuff is a lot better than, we've been running programs in underground bases for the last 30 years and testing this stuff on the general public to perfect it and get it to this point. Right. So that's a lot of what the alien agenda has been, is basically to cover up the actions of humans. And yeah, because we would all accept it if it was just aliens doing it to us, right? Because it's an us
Right.
versus them. They're like, of course the aliens are bad. They're from another planet. They're not human, right? But we have a really hard time accepting that there's, a group of humans, and maybe even a silent majority of humans, that think that these things are okay and want it. So
That's speculated that there is a group of individuals that are what some call white hats, that are the good guys, and that the evil ruling class is slowly losing power and being taken out in some different ways. Is this at all accurate, or is this just another false hope operation?
people have been telling that story since I was still a member. So no. White hats, what the truth of that is kind of that, people who have been involved in those things loosely get out, and so what they do is kind of protect people who also loosely get out, right? So there's certain, I think our name for them are usually mother houses, but it's like a place where, if you got out of their organization and were having a hard time just living in society, you could go live with other people who that is also true for. And those people would be considered white hats, but they don't have any teeth or any real say so, or aren't really doing anything, right? And a lot of what's going on is I basically just say the white and the dark hat are on the same head. So yeah.
For the next decade or so, intuitively, I feel like what we're going to see is a major swing back to the right wing, back to conservative ideologies, but to such an extreme rate that it's like Nazi Germany all over again, and we're going to be just enveloped with these totalitarian ideologies that keep us more enslaved than we are now. Do you see anything close to that?
Yeah, it's the
Am I close there?
revelation of the fact that we've had a one world government for a very long time is what we're going to get to watch over the next little while. If you look at any country in the world right now, you'll see the same thing happening with a slightly different variation. And that's all by design. And that's all to kind of get us, problem, reaction, solution style into asking for help, right? Even the play, if aliens ever did come involved, would be like, again, to get us to beg for, the powers that be to do something about it, right? And that's kind of what they're kind of starting to create by, driving towards a civil war in the United States, and complete communism in Canada, and all of these different things that eventually, there's going to be a breaking point for. That breaking point is what they want. That is the apocalypse, right? That is, it's all related, because the result is, us all speaking the same language so that we all understand each other, us all having the same religion so that we're not fighting over it, us all sharing the land so that we're not fighting over it, us all, eating the bugs and being happy, as they say, right? So.
Right. Man, it's so crazy how these elitist ideologies have this idea of what's best for everyone is going to bring us into the promised land, when in reality what's best for the group is killing the individual, and it's always been that way. So, man, we're in interesting times. This was fantastic. I loved your insights, and we're definitely going to have to do this again. But before you head out, remind the audience where they can find you.
If you do the little link tree URL after the slash, just Shane_Sedore, Sedore. You'll find all my links there. I have a Patreon channel where I do a lot of talking all month. I teach a magic class, which is meant to be kind of counterintuitive to what they're trying to do with technology. And yeah, I guess that's about it.
Awesome. Shane, thank you so much. We'll definitely do this again. And until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening. We will talk again tomorrow. See y'all then.